You know, you look in the mirror every morning and there is just this built-in assumption of continuity.
Right, yeah. You expect the reflection to be exactly what you left there.
Exactly. You see your face, your hands, your shoulder, and you just think, okay, that's me. I am a self-contained physical object moving through a room, and we are completely biologically hardwired to accept that reflection at face value.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
It is an incredibly convincing, very user-friendly interface. But, it is just an interface.
It's an interface. And when you start poking at the underlying code of reality, that reflection stops looking like a permanent fixture. It starts looking more like a temporary avatar.
Yeah, a localized user account.
Right. So we are diving into an absolute trip of a framework today. I want to welcome you to today's deep dive because we have got this wild stack of source material to unpack.
It's honestly fascinating. We're looking at these raw, kind of stream of consciousness voice notes, along with some AI chat logs from a highly creative author.
Yeah, someone who essentially tried to just reverse engineer the universe while thinking out loud. And what is so compelling about this deep dive is that we aren't dealing with mysticism here. We aren't dealing with abstract philosophy or anything like that.
No, not at all. The mission here is to look at human history, dimensional physics, and consciousness strictly through the objective lens of server architecture.
Which is such a refreshing, albeit slightly cynical, way to process existence.
It really is. The author's notes are blunt, they're chaotic in places, but underneath all that, there is a deeply cohesive structure. They are treating the universe as a massive computer system, a system admin framework.
A literal server. And just to lay out the parameters of what we are exploring today for you listening, we are entirely avoiding specific religious dogma. No modern political factions, no organized belief systems.
Right. We are simply looking at reality as a system log, stripping away all the cultural folklore to just analyze the raw data, the structural patterns.
So imagine you're sitting wherever you are right now, listening to my voice. What if the consciousness you use to process this conversation isn't generated by your brain at all?
That is the real hook.
What if your mind is actually a 5D operating system that has temporarily logged into a 4D biological hardware suit, which is currently rendering a 3D user interface?
It is a premise that changes absolutely everything about how you interact with the physical world.
It really does.
But to even grasp how a 5D operating system interacts with a meat suit, we can't just jump straight to the fifth dimension. We have to boot up the system from the absolute bottom. We have to map the server architecture starting at 0.
Let's do it. Booting up. Dimension 0. I was trying to picture what 0 dimensions even looks like, and honestly, my brain just hits a blank screen.
Well, yeah, because there's nothing for a biological brain to grab onto.
Yeah.
To visualize 0D, you have to strip away literally everything you understand about reality.
Okay, so like empty space.
Not even space. Imagine a single point. But it's a point with no height, no width, and no depth. It takes up absolutely 0 space.
Wow. There is no movement possible. And because there's no movement, there is no time. It is pure static existence. A singular coordinate that just, well, it just is.
It's the solitary pixel before the monitor even gets a power signal, completely locked in place.
Exactly.
So, to upgrade the hardware from that, we move to the first dimension. 1D. I take that static pixel and I stretch it out. Now I have a line.
And suddenly, you have an axis. You have a track. An entity existing in a 1D universe can move forward along that line, and it can move backward along the line. But that is a pretty bleak existence, isn't it? If there are two entities on that 1D line, they can never pass each other.
Right. There is no round.
You just bump into the person in front of you forever.
The physics of their universe simply do not contain the math for the concept of a round. To pass each other, they need a second axis. They need the second dimension, 2D.
The plane.
Yes, the plane. Think of a perfectly flat piece of paper. The beings living here, the author refers to the classic concept of the flatlander.
Oh, I love the flatlander concept.
It's so useful. So these beings now have an X and a Y axis. They can move forward, backward, left, and right. They can walk in circles. They can navigate a maze drawn in ink.
Right.
But here is the critical limitation for them. They have absolutely 0 concept of up or down relative to the paper itself.
I want to linger on this for a second because it is so crucial for everything that comes later. If I am a flatlander living on this paper, the space hovering 1 inch above my head doesn't just feel empty. It literally does not exist in my vocabulary.
No, not in your math, not in your biology.
My 2D eyes only look along the flat edge of the paper.
Your entire reality is infinitely thin. You cannot perceive depth. And this lockation sets up one of the most important thought experiments in this entire stack of notes.
How does a lower dimensional being perceive a higher dimensional intersection?
Exactly.
Okay, let's play this out for you listening. You are a 3D being. You live in a world of volume. Now imagine you walk up to that 2D flat paper universe sitting on a table. You decide you want to interact with the Flatlander. So you take your 3D finger and you poke it straight down, physically intersecting their paper world.
Right, and from your vantage point in 3D space, this is a completely mundane action. You are lowering a fleshy cylinder through a flat plane. You see your knuckles, your wrist, your arm guiding the movement.
But the Flatlander can't look up to see my arm, so what the hell do they actually see when my finger breaches their universe?
They see a miracle.
A literal miracle.
Because they only perceive the infinitely thin cross-section of your finger that is currently touching the paper, they don't see a finger at all. They see a 2D circle spontaneously materialize out of thin air.
And as I push my finger deeper through the paper, because, my finger is tapered and gets wider toward the knuckle, that circle would appear to mysteriously grow larger and larger in their world?
To the Flatlander's top scientists, this is an utter violation of the laws of physics.
Right. Matter just materialized from nothing.
It is changing size with no visible force acting upon it. And then as you pull your finger back out of the paper, the circle shrinks and blinks completely out of existence.
I keep thinking about this like a retro video game. If you have a classic 2D sprite character running left and right across a screen, their entire programming is restricted to the X and Y axes.
The hardware limit.
Yeah. If the developers suddenly dropped a massive, fully rendered 3D sphere onto that map, the game's rendering engine couldn't handle the Z-axis. It couldn't show the depth of the sphere. The sprite would just run into a flat, expanding ring of pixels that appeared out of nowhere.
That is the exact mechanical limitation. The 2D hardware cannot process a 3D data packet. It can only render the localized slice that intersects its plane.
So, bringing this back to us, we add the Z-axis to the paper and we arrive at our home turf, 3D. We have volume, depth, up, down, forward, back. But the reason the author focuses so heavily on the Flatlander isn't just a geometry lesson, is it?
No, it's a mirror. We are the Flatlanders.
You are the one stuck on the paper.
Exactly. Our biology, the human eye, the visual cortex, the way our brains parse spatial data, is entirely hard-coded to process exactly 3 dimensions. We navigate a spatial interface.
So if a higher dimensional event were to intersect our reality,
we wouldn't see the majestic full shape of that event. We would only see the bizarre, inexplicable 3D cross-section of it.
Okay, so if 3D is basically just a single snapshot, a frozen frame of volume, what happens when we hit the play button? What happens when time starts moving? If I step entirely outside of my 3D perspective and look at my own life from the 4th dimension, what is the actual shape of the file?
For that, we have to move from spatial geometry to temporal geometry. In theoretical physics, this is often debated under the framework of the block universe.
Right.
But the author uses a much more visceral physical metaphor they call the 4D human shape the time worm, or the time slug.
The time slug. I have to admit, when I first read that, I pictured a terrible B-movie monster, just this gross slug, but the mechanics behind it are staggering.
They really are. You have to stop thinking of time as a current that you are floating down. In the 4th dimension, time is a physical structural axis, exactly like width or height.
So it's distance.
Exactly. If you look at an object in 3D, it has length. If you look at a human life in 4D, its duration is its length.
Wow.
If you could view yourself from a true 4D perspective, you wouldn't be a person walking around a kitchen making coffee. You would be a single, solid, continuous object stretching across time.
Meaning I am a literal fleshy tube that begins at the exact hospital coordinate where I was born, winding its way through every house I've lived in, every car I've driven, and terminating at the exact coordinate where I eventually die.
A completely unbroken structure. In 4D, you do not experience time passing sequentially. You simply are the entirety of the object.
So the infancy, the awkward teenage years, the middle age, and the final breath, they all exist simultaneously.
You are a unified, unmoving geometric structure suspended in the server.
Wait, hold on. If I am a solid block of time, a completely static tube from birth to death, that severely messes with the concept of free will.
Oh, it completely upends it.
The notes talk about the no-action paradox. If the whole worm already exists simultaneously, there is no doing.
That is the paradox. A 4D being doesn't choose to make a left turn down a hallway. To a higher dimensional admin observing the server, that 4D being is basically a frozen statue that happens to have a permanent bend to the left at that specific set of coordinates.
That is deeply unsettling. It implies absolute determinism. I'm just a prop in a diorama that was already built. Are we just trapped in a cosmic block of ice?
It's the ultimate existential dread. But the author's framework offers a really cool pivot to escape that dread. You have to separate the shape of the data from the rendering of the data.
Okay, unpack that.
You feel the illusion of free will. You feel the painful passage of time because of the severe limitations of your hardware. Your 3D biological brain lacks the processing power to render the entire 4D file at once.
So we aren't trapped in a block of ice. We just have a severely outdated graphics card.
Exactly. The author uses a brilliant analogy here to bridge the gap between that terrifying determinism and our everyday experience. They ask you to look at a vinyl record.
The record player analogy. Okay, break down how this works with the time worm.
When you listen to a record, you drop the needle into the groove. The needle's entire reality is restricted to the intense friction of that tiny diamond tip in the present moment.
Right.
It only hears the specific snare drum hit or guitar chord that is playing right now. It has the memory of the verse that just finished, and it's physically moving toward the chorus, but it can only experience the data sequentially.
Drip-fed data,
Yeah.
1 millisecond at a time.
Exactly. The needle is your 3D consciousness. But the 4D reality is the vinyl record itself.
Oh, wow.
The record does not experience the song sequentially. The intro, the bridge, the silence at the end is all permanently stamped into the physical object simultaneously. If you hold a record in your hands and look at it, there is no music. It is entirely silent, static data.
So we are writing the needle. We experience the data packet of our lives sequentially because that is literally the only way a 3D interface can parse 4D geometry without crashing.
Precisely. It's a hardware constraint.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
But if we accept that my body is this continuous 4D time slug, this solid stem stretching 80 or 90 years, it didn't just spawn out of nothing. Where do the physical building blocks for that stem come from?
This is where the notes move from individual temporal geometry to deep time and ancestral architecture.
This part is so poetic.
It really is. The author transitions the time worm into arguably the most profound metaphor in the stack, the inverted dandelion.
This blew my mind. I want you, listening, to picture a dandelion after it has bloomed. You know the stage where it turns into that white, fuzzy globe of seeds that you blow into the wind?
The classic wish flower.
Yeah. Keep that image in your head, but flip it backward. Reverse the timeline.
The solid green stem of that dandelion represents your localized 4D biological body. It's the time worm of your specific lifespan.
But if I trace my solid green stem backward in time, all the way down to the exact second of my conception, the stem doesn't hit a wall. It explodes outward. It fractures into the fuzz.
Because tracing the tail of your 4D worm backward, you hit a Y junction. The biological data packets of the egg and the sperm.
Right.
But those two branches don't stop. They instantly split again,
Yeah.
branching into your 4 grandparents. Then your 8 great-grandparents.
It's a violent, exponential explosion of data. The author does the math on this, and it is staggering.
It really is.
If you trace that biological fuzz back just 30 generations, which is roughly the year 1000 AD, you have over 1 billion ancestors in your direct lineage. 1 billion individual human beings.
Surviving famines, fleeing wars, migrating across ice bridges, falling in love, all just to perfectly align the exact sequence of code that resulted in the physical hardware you're sitting in right now.
But the author doesn't stop at genetic ancestry. The inverted dandelion extends into the absolute physical substrate, the consumption web.
Right, because your physical body wasn't just built out of generic human material. The stem is built out of atoms.
And if I trace the dandelion fuzz of my atoms backward, where does it go?
It fractures into the environment. The iron in your blood came from spinach, which pulled it from the topsoil, which was deposited by an ancient glacial shift, which was originally forged in the heart of a collapsing star.
That is just incredible to think about.
Your 4D stem is constructed from the ancient water tables, the pulverized bones of Jurassic predators, the atmospheric ash of prehistoric volcanoes.
If you follow your specific dandelion fuzz far enough, it covers the entire planet like a dense net. The boundary between me and the outside world completely collapses. I am just a highly specific rendering of recycled Earth.
And if you keep tracing that fractal fuzz backward, following every single subatomic particle through deep time, the expansion eventually reverses. The infinite web of fuzz pulls together, converging back into a single point of infinite density.
The Big Bang, or in the author's server terminology, the Genesis server.
Every single line of code, every particle that comprises your current avatar, was originally compressed into the primary drive of the Genesis server before the system was powered on.
And the life cycle is perfectly symmetrical. If the inverted dandelion begins at the Genesis server and funnels down into my solid stem, what happens at the end of the timeline? What happens when I die?
Right, because you don't just hit a brick wall and vanish. The author uses a great computer graphics term here to explain it: dithering.
Dithering, like in digital rendering.
Exactly. In digital rendering, dithering is what happens when an image loses its sharp resolution. The pixels scatter, they diffuse into the surrounding space.
So my biological stem dithers, the localized hardware fails, the bonds break down, and my physical file diffuses right back into the environment.
You render back into the soil, the air, and the groundwater, becoming the raw fuzz for thousands of new stems.
Which forces a radical shift in how you perceive reality. I mean, the feeling of separation, the idea that you are a distinct entity sitting on a chair, separate from the floorboards, separate from the trees outside. It's just a localized 3D optical illusion.
In 4D, you in the chair you were sitting on are literally branches of the exact same cosmic flower.
The wood of the chair and the carbon in my body trace back to the exact same root system.
You are just experiencing a highly localized coordinate on a massive, interconnected biological web.
Okay, so we have mapped the physical hardware. We have the 4D biological stem rooted in the Genesis server. But this begs the biggest question of the entire deep dive.
The mind.
Right. If the 4D time worm is just the biological hardware, the meat suit, what is the mind? What is the actual user navigating this interface?
This is where we introduce the 5D operating system. If the physical body is a four-dimensional object, the consciousness observing it and driving it cannot be restricted to those same four dimensions. The mind must operate on a higher plane.
The author grounds this in a very real, very frustrating scientific dilemma called the binding problem. Let's talk about why neuroscientists can't find consciousness.
It's a huge issue in science. Neurobiology is incredibly advanced. We can map the physical brain with terrifying precision. We can watch synapses fire on an fMRI. We can measure the electrical impulses jumping across neurons when you eat an apple or listen to a song.
Right, the mapping is flawless.
But despite all that mapping, science cannot find a single localized point in the brain where the subjective experience of the song happens.
They can find the processor, but they can't find the feeling. They can't find the you that is enjoying the song.
Because it is a fundamental category error. The notes use an incredibly elegant analogy to explain this. Imagine you find a vintage radio playing a jazz song. You want to know where the band is? So you take a hammer and smash the radio into pieces.
You dissect it. You map every copper wire, every vacuum tube, every magnet in the speaker.
But no matter how perfectly you catalog the physical components of the radio, you'll never find the jazz music inside it.
Because the music isn't generated by the radio.
Exactly. The music is a frequency, a signal being broadcast from a completely different location. The radio is merely a localized receiver built to catch that signal and translate it into audio.
So my brain is just a wetware antenna.
That's it.
In this framework, your consciousness, the actual you that is listening to my voice right now, is a 5D cloud-based entity. It is an operating system that is temporarily logged into the specific 3D coordinate of your biological brain.
Which means we need to define what the fifth dimension actually is and how it differs from the fourth. The author has a serious axe to grind with how pop culture usually portrays 5D, and they specifically call out a very famous sci-fi film, Interstellar.
Oh, I love this critique. So in the climax of Interstellar, the protagonist enters this hypercube, the Tesseract, which is presented as a 5D space. Time is laid out physically.
Right.
He floats behind his daughter's bookshelf and can look through the cracks to see different moments of her life. He can navigate time like walking down a hallway.
It makes for great cinema, but logically, the author points out that this is absolutely not the fifth dimension. What the movie depicts is merely a 4D browsing tool.
The notes call it a 4D browser with parental controls.
It is, because what is he actually looking at? He is only looking at his own linear timeline, the specific events that historically happened.
Yeah, he can't see alternatives.
He cannot see a timeline where he died in the spacecraft launch. He cannot see a timeline where he stayed on Earth and became a farmer. He is locked into a single, closed file.
So true 5D is not just a recording of history. True 5D is an infinite probability space.
It is the realm of absolute variance If 4D is the single line of decisions you actually made, 5D is the infinite web of every conceivable what-if. It's a choose-your-own-adventure book where every single page, every single possible outcome of every microscopic decision exists and is happening simultaneously.
Which is just, I mean, if a 3D brain tried to genuinely perceive true 5D space, it would shatter. It would be like trying to read a single text message while drowning in a billion terabytes of raw data.
The wetware antenna would fry.
Right. So if my true self is this 5D cloud consciousness with access to infinite probability, but it's currently jammed into this tightly restricted 3D hardware antenna, how do the software and the hardware communicate?
They communicate through system glitches.
Huh.
Things that human history has heavily romanticized as magic, psychic phenomena, or premonitions.
Deja vu. This completely reframed deja vu for me. I always thought of it as a misfiring memory, just a brain hiccup.
Most people do. But the notes frame deja vu as your hardware accidentally catching a data packet from your 5D probability cloud.
It's a momentary buffering error. Your 3D brain, for a fraction of a millisecond, gets unauthorized access to its true, higher dimensional shape.
Because your 5D operating system already sees the entire probability space, it already knows the outcome of the room you just walked into.
Wow.
When that data accidentally leaks into the 3D receiver, you get that eerie sensation that you have lived this exact moment before.
You haven't lived it before in time. Your cloud data just already mapped the probability. That completely strips the mysticism away. It reduces paranormal intuition to a system lag.
It really does.
Yeah.
To illustrate how wildly we misinterpret these system lags, the author brings up the monkeys on a ladder experiment.
This is such a crucial metaphor for human hubris. Okay, imagine a team of scientists puts a group of monkeys in a sealed room. In the center of the room is a tall ladder.
Setting the stage.
The scientists want to train the monkeys to climb, so every time a monkey goes up one rung, an automated dispenser drops a banana. The monkeys quickly learn the local physics of their universe climb ladder, receive banana. It is a predictable cause and effect loop. They think they are masters of their domain.
They've completely mapped their local reality.
Right. But one day, a monkey gets all the way to the very top rung, and on the ceiling, just above the ladder, is a light bulb. The monkey, just messing around, reaches up and unscrews the bulb. The scientists, watching through a camera, decide to trigger a massive reward. They flood the entire room with hundreds of bananas all at once.
Now consider the perspective of the monkeys in that moment.
To the monkeys, they just discovered god-level magic. They found a secret cheat code that summons infinite food from the sky. They will probably start a religion based on unscrewing light bulbs.
But the scientists outside the room know there's absolutely no magic involved. Unscrewing the bulb was just a hidden trigger within the system's programming.
The monkeys merely stumbled onto a line of code they previously lacked the vertical access to reach.
Exactly. So when a person has a sudden, inexplicable gut feeling not to get on a specific airplane and that plane crashes, are they psychic?
Or are they just a monkey who accidentally bumped the 5D light bulb? Are psychics and premonitions just us unscrewing the bulb?
In the system admin framework, they just triggered a hidden probability alert from their cloud OS. We attribute these things to guardian angels or mystical foresight, but it's simply our limited hardware momentarily interacting with a broader data set.
But this brings up a terrifying physical problem. We've established how the software interacts through glitches. But what happens if a higher dimensional object actually intersects our physical world?
Right, moving from software to hardware.
We talked about the Flatlander seeing a 3D finger as a growing circle. The author scales this up into what they call the toe-dipping theory.
If a 4D entity wanted to observe a 3D room, it could not simply turn a doorknob and walk in. A 4D object is a continuous timeline. It cannot fit inside a localized spatial box.
It has to intersect the plane, just like the finger intercepting the paper. And because our 3D graphics card, our biological eyes cannot render a massive 4D file simultaneously, the intersection creates a colossal rendering error.
The visual artifact of a higher dimension entering a lower one.
The notes paint an absolutely horrific picture of what this would actually look like to a human observer. If a 4D person dipped their toe into our dimension, you wouldn't see a solid, glowing humanoid. You would see a chaotic, flickering strobe light of aging.
Because the 4D entity is their entire lifespan, intersecting our plane mashes their temporal coordinates together into a single spatial point.
So you would see a writhing blur of skin, hair, and bone. In one fraction of a second, the localized pixels might render a baby's crying face instantly morphing into an adult's torso, collapsing into an elderly person's withered hand.
It would look like a corrupted digital file violently thrashing around in your living room.
A completely unstable mirage. And the author uses this precise rendering error to systematically recontextualize centuries of human ghost stories.
Hauntings.
Yes, hauntings.
When someone claims to see a spectral figure repeating a specific action in a hallway, like, a Victorian woman walking through a wall, they are not witnessing a tortured soul trapped in purgatory.
They are looking at a system cache error. The server is glitching.
It is a localized 3D buffer that has trapped a 3-second clip of a 4D data packet and is failing to clear the cache. It's stuck on loop. You aren't seeing a ghost. You are seeing corrupted server data failing to dither properly.
Honestly, that is infinitely more terrifying than a ghost. But wait, if I am a solid 4D slug, let's say my lifespan is 85 years long, how do I perceive a house that is 120 years long? Let's say I live in a house that was built in 1900, and it won't be demolished until 2050. The house is a 150-year-long 4D object. I am an 85-year-long 4D object.
How do the files sync up?
Right. Why don't I perceive the house being built before I was born?
The author anticipates this exact logistical nightmare, and they resolve it with a protocol they call the sleeve effect.
The sleeve effect. Walk me through how the server manages this.
Think of your consciousness as a user account. You do not have root access to the entire timeline of the Earth server. You are heavily restricted. Your perception, your viewfinder, is strictly limited to the length of your own biological sleeve.
My lifespan is my maximum render distance.
Precisely. The server only renders the specific segments of the environment that actively overlap with your account's activity window.
So the 150-year-old house has decades of data logged before my user account existed, and it will have decades of data log after my account is terminated.
Right. To my consciousness, those outer sections of the house's 4D file are completely encrypted. I can't access them. I can only perceive the cross-section where my biological sleeve intersects with the house's timeline.
It's a brilliantly efficient way for the Genesis server to conserve processing power. It prevents the system from crashing by restricting every user strictly to local relevant data.
It's procedural generation, like in modern video games. The environment only fully renders when the player character is looking at it.
Exactly.
Okay, so we have looked very closely at the micro level, the biology, the glitches, the individual user experience, but where the notes get truly provocative is when the author zooms out. They take this system admin framework and apply it to the macro level, to human history.
This is the ultimate Silicon Valley rebranding of our past. By viewing the universe strictly as the Genesis server, the author strips away the romanticism of history books and analyzes human conflict entirely as a system log. And, again, to reiterate our ground rules for this deep dive, we are leaving all specific names, nations, and religious titles completely out of this. We are looking at the bare mechanics of human behavior.
Right, the raw action.
The author scans the system log of human history, looking at centuries of conquests, empires, and colonizations. And they identify a massively destructive, recurring behavioral bug. They label it cultural appropriation malware.
It is a devastatingly accurate way to describe the hypocrisy of empirical conquest. When you look at the system log objectively, ancient conquerors functioned as brutal system bullies and gaslighters.
They operated like a virus. An invading empire would sweep into a neighboring territory, and to justify deleting the indigenous population from the database, they would label them as corrupted files. They would call them primitive, savage, or uncultured.
That was the narrative protocol required to justify overriding the indigenous existence. But the malware aspect is what happens next.
Right, because while actively dehumanizing and deleting these people, the conquerors would simultaneously steal their UI assets.
Their user interface assets.
Yes. The empire would execute the population, but they would harvest their unique aesthetic codes. They would steal their intricate textile patterns, their advanced architectural masonry, their agricultural terracing techniques, and their botanical medicines.
And then the conquerors would integrate these stolen UI assets into their own empire source code, parading them around the capital city as symbols of their own elite status.
They labeled the creators primitive, yet literally draped themselves in the creator's aesthetic brilliance. It's parasitic data behavior.
The author views this not just as a historical tragedy, but as a literal corruption of the server's potential. It's bad code, overwriting good code, and stealing the graphics.
But the author also applies the subjective admin framework to the inverse of tragedy. They look at historical anomalies, events that humanity widely categorizes as miracles, specifically the recorded instances of raising the dead.
Right, the resurrection hack.
I love this concept. If you reframe reality as a server, then an ultimate supreme entity, a system admin, doesn't perform magic. They don't cast spells or wave a staff. They execute a developer hack.
They manipulate the root code. Think about what biological death actually is in this framework. The biological file has closed. The 4D stem has hit its termination coordinate and has begun the process of dithering back into the environmental fuzz.
So to reverse death, the admin doesn't sprinkle fairy dust. They access the server's deleted folder, they pull out the closed biological file, and they execute a command to manually undither the data.
They force the scattered environmental pixels to snap back into a sharp, localized resolution. They force the 4D biological stem to ignore its termination point and continue growing.
It is quite literally a server rollback. They revert the localized system to a previous save state.
But exploring this concept leads the author into a profound theoretical loop regarding who the admin actually is. They introduce the bootstrap paradox.
The classic time travel paradox. If a time traveler journeys back to the early 1900s to hand a famous historical physicist the completed math for the theory of relativity, and the physicist publishes it, where did the math actually originate?
Right, because the physicist didn't invent it, but the time traveler only knew it because the physicist historically published it.
It's a closed loop of information, a software file with no original programmer.
And the author applies this closed source loop to the very existence of a system admin. What if the admin, reaching back through the logs to execute these hacks, to correct the corrupted code and reverse terminal errors, isn't an external omnipotent deity from outside the server?
What if the admin is simply a future version of humanity?
A heavily evolved, highly advanced, higher dimensional iteration of our own species.
That thought gives me chills. If the admin is just our own distant future reaching back through the server log to patch the violence bugs in our legacy code, that means we are our own rescue mission.
We're the ones ultimately responsible for maintaining the integrity of the timeline so that we don't accidentally delete ourselves before we reach that advanced state.
I want to pause here and address the cynical undercurrent of these notes because it is heavy. Looking at history as corrupted data, labeling human tragedy as malware, it can feel cold, it can feel deeply detached.
It can.
But I think it's a vital, necessary lens. We have spent millennia using romanticized, whitewashed narratives, manifest destiny, divine right, the march of progress to gloss over the brutal, bloody parts of our system log.
The myths provide comfort, but they obscure the actual mechanics of the violence.
Exactly. This framework strips away the comforting myth and forces you to look at the raw, corrupted code. It's uncomfortable. But more importantly, it shifts the listener's role entirely.
It empowers you.
Yes. You are no longer a passive user sitting around waiting for a divine software update to fix the world. If we are the future admins, then we are responsible for debugging the legacy code right now. The responsibility is entirely local.
It demands active, conscious participation in the architecture of reality. But if we accept this mantle, if we are the system admins, we inevitably have to test the boundaries of our own hardware. We have to look at the physical limitations of the Genesis server itself.
The edges of the map.
Right. And in our physical universe, the ultimate hard limit is the speed of light.
186,282 miles per second. It's the cosmic speed limit. But in this framework, we aren't just looking at the speed of light as really incredibly fast. We are looking at it as the universe's ultimate rendering limit.
It is the absolute maximum processing speed of the server's graphics card.
Think about a computer struggling to load a massive, highly detailed open-world video game. If you put your character in a jet and fly too fast, the hardware can't render the trees and buildings in front of you quickly enough. The screen stutters, the frame rate drops, and eventually the game crashes.
The physics of our universe operate on a similar threshold, governed by mass energy equivalence. As an object moves faster, its relative mass increases. To push an object with mass to the speed of light would require infinite energy. The server simply does not possess the processing power to render mass moving that fast.
But hackers always look for exploits. What if you could bypass the mass energy limit? The author introduces a concept they call exospace theory.
This is where it gets really wild.
The premise is radical. If you actually manage to break the light barrier, you don't just travel to another star system faster, you break the physics engine itself. You clip right through the floor of the 3D universe.
You exit the rendered game world entirely. You enter what the author calls the substrate.
The substrate. The empty, unrendered void where the universe's actual code is stored. It's like glitching through a wall in a video game and falling into that infinite gray abyss beneath the map, watching the world float above you.
It is a fascinating theoretical escape hatch. But actually executing that exploit involves catastrophic logistical nightmares. The notes meticulously detail what the author refers to as the meteor problem.
The physics of traveling anywhere near that rendering limit are entirely unforgiving. Let's say you build a ship capable of traveling at 186,000 miles per second. The kinetic energy generated by that velocity is unfathomable.
Because space is not a perfect vacuum. It is littered with microscopic debris, rogue hydrogen atoms, and cosmic dust. If your ship, traveling at light speed, strikes a single speck of dust,
It carries the kinetic impact force of a localized nuclear detonation. You can't just slab a thick metal bumper on the front of the ship. The friction alone would vaporize the hull. The ship wouldn't crash. It would convert into pure, brilliant energy in a microsecond.
so how do you bypass the collision detection of the server? The solution the notes explore is grounded in real theoretical physics, the Alcubierre drive, a warp bubble.
And this is where the astrophysics align perfectly with the system admin metaphor. To survive the journey, you don't actually move the ship through the space. That triggers the collision detection. Instead, you manipulate the code of the environment.
You wrap the ship in an isolated bubble of space-time. The drive mechanism compresses the spatial code in front of the ship and expands the spatial code behind the ship.
You are moving the space around the ship. Inside the bubble, the ship isn't moving at all. It is perfectly stationary in its own local pocket of reality. The universe is essentially sliding past the window.
Which neatly solves the meteor problem. If a piece of cosmic dust approaches, it doesn't strike the hull. It encounters the distorted space-time of the bubble and simply flows around it like a pebble flowing around the hull of a submarine in a current.
It's an ingenious exploit. But even if you solve the collision detection, you still have a massive propulsion problem. You need a way to spin up the drive to reach that rendering limit in the first place.
Which brings up the most terrifying, grandiose engineering concept in the entire stack of notes. The CERN slingshot.
The problem with accelerating a massive object to light speed is that you need a runway. And even in the vastness of space, you cannot guarantee a clean, dust-free runway long enough to safely build that kind of momentum linearly.
So the author proposes a planetary scale solution. You build a massive circular space station, a colossal ring, structurally similar to the massive particle accelerators we have on Earth, but scaled up to house an entire starship.
You place the ship inside the vacuum tube of this massive ring and you start winding it up. You accelerate it in a controlled, localized loop. The ship just goes round and round, building momentum circularly, managing the massive centrifugal forces, pushing faster and faster until it is hovering right up against the 186,000 mile per second limit.
The tension of that scenario is incredible. The system is pushed to the absolute brink of its processing power. And then, at the precise, mathematically calculated microsecond, you open the loop.
You release the slingshot, you fire the ship out of the ring in a perfectly straight tangent line, aiming it dead at your target star system.
But the margin for error is non-existent.
It is the ultimate cosmic game over. If the release mechanism is delayed by even a billionth of a second, if your trajectory angle is off by 0.00001% when you exit that loop, the sheer velocity compounds that microscopic error exponentially.
You wouldn't just miss a neighboring star by a few miles.
You would miss your target star by millions of light years. You would blast past the intended destination, overshooting the rendered environment of the galaxy entirely. And because you are moving too fast to ever initiate a deceleration burn, you would find yourself permanently trapped in the substrate.
An infinite, dark, unrendered void. Nothing outside the window but empty code.
A permanent glitch in the system, forever drifting out of bounds in the Genesis server, unable to ever log back into the physical game world.
It is a profoundly sobering thought to anchor such a massive theoretical framework.
It really is. We have covered an unbelievable amount of conceptual ground today, parsing through this brilliant, chaotic stack of notes, and I want to make sure we ground this back into your daily reality as you go about your week.
We've mapped a profound journey. From the frozen, static point of zero dimensions, up through the Flatlander's confusion at the expanding circle, and into the stark realization of the block universe, where our 4D bodies exist not as fleeting moments, but as solid, continuous temporal structure spanning decades.
You are not just an isolated dot walking through a room today. You are an inverted dandelion. Your biological stem is built from the deep, violent, beautiful history of the planet, branching backward through billions of specific human ancestors, threading through dinosaurs and supernovas, all the way to the initial boot sequence of the Big Bang.
And observing that localized biological stem is your 5D cloud-based consciousness. An operating system navigating an infinite probability space, occasionally catching glitches and buffering errors, moving through a reality that is structured, managed, and occasionally hacked, exactly like a complex digital server.
It reframes absolutely everything. It turns history from a dusty textbook into an active system log full of legacy code and malware, and it places the responsibility on us, as the current active users, to patch that code. But after mapping out all of this, the biological hardware, the cloud software, the hard rendering limits of light speed, there is one final lingering thread that the author implies but never explicitly answers.
The ultimate question of the user agreement.
Exactly. I want you to mull this over the next time you look in that mirror. If your consciousness is truly just a 5D operating system, a cloud-based entity that is only temporarily logged into this specific 3D biological coordinate, what actually happens to your cloud data when your local biological hardware eventually powers down and dithers back into the Earth?
Are you simply quietly reassigned to a new physical terminal somewhere else in the network?
Or do you finally get root access to the entire Genesis server?